Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of the Secure Connections podcast, brought to you by IoTSSA, the Internet of Things Security Services Association. As always, I'm Brian Sherman, Content Director for IoTSSA, and I have the privilege of hosting today's podcast. And joining me as guest on this episode is Matt Solomon, VP of Business Development for ID Agent, a vendor of dark web awareness training and other cybersecurity services. Welcome back to the Secure Connections podcast, Matt.
Thank you, Brian. Very excited to be here.
Great. Glad you could join us today. Hey, it's been a busy spring and early summer. I like to put that summer in there because I think it has arrived finally.
Yeah.
So your team has been very busy between all the channel events you've been involved in, as well as the news side. So can you bring the audience up to speed on the latest happenings with ID Agent and the things that you're doing?
Yeah. Just to kind of give a recap for the audience who may have not heard of us. We kind of shifted to the channel, really fully focused towards the channel back in May of 2017. So really only, just about 2 years ago. Signed a couple MSPs very early on with no actual channel model at the time. They told us, hey, this doesn't fit, MSP models, and they actually helped us develop our pricing model that's very similar actually to when it was first started. And really that's been our mantra ever since. I mean, we've really listened to our partners, and over the last 2 years we've been fortunate enough to grow from 0 MSPs to almost 1,900 now in 21 or 22 different countries. So our core focus is dark web monitoring, which we're monitoring for compromised credentials associated with organizations. Typically what's happening is employees using their work emails on third-party websites like LinkedIn, Dropbox, for example, and those websites get breached, and then the work credentials are being exposed and putting those organizations at risk. I think we'll talk about some of our new features and things like that a bit later, but we've also launched what's called Bullfish ID, which is our phishing and security awareness training programs. We've got a lot of new things with our partner program in terms of marketing, things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's just been a wild ride, and just, obviously coming off a couple really big events over the last week or two, it's only gotten more intense. It's been fun though.
Definitely. Now, I know one of the places we were in India last year was in Washington, D.C. You're kind of in that area, based in Maryland,
Yep.
kind of the hub of all the government cybersecurity activity as well. There's a relationship in the past with the government side?
Yeah, so Kevin Lancaster, our CEO, actually still owns a company called the Windvale Group. So they do government consulting and advisory services for companies wanting to do business with the government. And actually, that's where I first started. Kevin came out with this idea. He asked me to move over. At the time, we were in downtown DC, so it was the two of us. And then now we have got 40 employees. So we went from 2 to 40 in a 2-year span. But the government stuff is, very interesting opportunity, and something we just really unveiled, actually, and I don't think you even know about this, but for GSA schedules. So we're using our contract vehicle, so our MSP partners can actually use us as a conduit to sell into the government. So it's just kind of starting to kick off, but we're pretty excited because it gives a lot of our partners bigger opportunities to work with the government.
Great. So we got like the latest news scoop. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I'll give you plenty.
That's great. No, I only mentioned Maryland and DC because I know that's been a hub of a lot of cybersecurity activity, especially with some of the Chinese hacking groups and others. So you guys have been there, seen it, and
Yep.
provides a solid foundation for a company so active in the channel.
Yeah.
So one of the things we hear from providers is that their small business customers think dark web monitoring is just for like enterprise companies. That mindset traditionally is we're too small. We're kind of immune from the larger cybersecurity threats. How can MSPs convey the need for these type of cybersecurity services to their clients and prospects?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges we hear from our partners. So one of the things that we talk about often, and we have them in our slide deck, is using the news. Because the news every day is coming out with stories that back up and give you evidence that small businesses are a target. So ID Agent has a thing called the Week in Breach, and you can have access to whether you're a partner or not. You can subscribe for free. If you're a partner, you can actually repurpose it. But every week we're recapping breaches from around the world. So when you're talking to a church and they're telling you no one's going to hack a church, for certain reasons, well, we've got examples in the Week in Breach that actually show them that that's not true. So it really helps, empower the MSP to say, no, look, I'm showing you several examples of a construction company, that are, small businesses being targeted. And even during our presentations, we have slide decks that prove that small businesses are actually being targeted on the dark web. And we actually have snapshots, and we can allow our partners to use those snapshots to really create this idea. And oftentimes we have something called Goal Assist, where we'll actually get on webinars, similar like this, having conversations, and we'll have an opportunity to educate their customers. So we come in as the subject matter expert, and then they come in afterwards and say, now you've seen why this is a risky organization, and this is why we're rolling it out to everybody. So that's also a big opportunity, is using us, as that subject matter expert. And I think the really cool thing is, because ID Agent originally started off selling in the enterprise space, I mean, we're talking about, entire state governments have the same exact product as an SMB. Some of the largest law firms in the world, largest sports leagues in the United States, some of the biggest nonprofit organizations. So our MSP partners can actually, allude to that, right? They can say, look, you're getting the same dark web monitoring as an entire state government in the United States. So I think that makes a pretty compelling message when they're trying to help their SMBs understand the risk.
That makes sense. So you said the weekend breach. Where can our listeners find that?
Yeah, if you just go to idagent.com, and there's a blog area, and it'll be under there. Yep.
Awesome. I'll make sure I do that too. That's
Yeah.
always good. Don't want to miss any.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. So as we talk about, a lot of the businesses really are still in reactive mode. I think not necessarily even the smallest ones, but even some of the mid-sized companies are hey, I've got firewall, I've got AV, I'm good. What additional things can MSPs do to change the attitude with those type of customers? I know that's one of the biggest objections, is not just we're too small, but it's, money and other things, is they don't feel it's that important that they need to be more proactive with things like dark web services and penetration testing, and unless they're being forced by compliance rules or other reasons to do it.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, compliance as a service is a pretty interesting, that's a whole nother path, but there are some really interesting examples of how to use that. It's continuous education, and I don't necessarily mean just security awareness training. I just mean just general education around these, the phishing that are coming out. Some of it's just a culture. Like, you have to start putting up posters of examples. Like, in our portal, we have examples of what to look for in a phishing email, like the 5 things. And I really think, like, every employee should have that right by their desk, so that they're always, being made aware of it. I think MSPs, they also struggle for QBRs. So I think that's also an opportunity to, do it on a quarterly basis, make sure you're reinforcing it. But it is a huge challenge. I also think an interesting thing, and I've heard this from a couple MSPs, rewarding people for submitting, if they get a phishing email and they submit it to their MSP, to say, hey, this doesn't look right. There's like a reward program, for being vigilant for these things. So I don't think there's an easy answer for that, but I think the culture and continuous awareness is probably the key to doing it. Is you have to be consistently talking about it.
Yeah, those are great points, is trying to get it more at home and making it part of not just the personnel policy, but everyday life for everybody who has access to a computer. And that's not always easy, because, obviously they have day jobs, but this becomes part of their day job. And I think that's the hardest part. Even some of the feedback we got from the Cybersecurity Expo in Minnesota last week was, that's a continual struggle, is no matter how much they do, how much work they do to put all of these services in place and proactively monitor, it's just that one link click that somebody makes, a bad email that they download a file from or whatever. It just takes one mistake and they're done. And I don't think a lot of end users still understand that, at least not enough. I think there's more, but not enough.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, so we just relaunched what's called Spotlight ID. It's our personal identity monitoring program.
Okay.
And I hadn't thought of this when we were first talking about it, but I think that's also an opportunity. So, like, let's say you roll that out as an employee benefit, or they have to pay to get it, but then they're getting personal alerts, right? And then I think that raises their awareness as well. So that's an interesting way of going about it. It's like, hey, we're doing this on the organization level, but we're actually going to look out for you on a personal level. And trust me, when people start getting alerts personally, it makes a difference. They start becoming a lot more aware that they're at risk as well.
It's not just something my boss makes me do to
Right.
get that check mark, right? It's
Yeah.
to make it real. That's a great point. So fantastic. But how much should MSPs be sharing with their clients about dark web? I always love to talk about dark web because it's still one of those unaware things, even in many parts of the channel. Is
Yeah.
there a danger to giving their clients too much information?
So, so when we do our presentations, I often say the way I'm presenting it is exactly how you should present it to your customers. So, I mean, MSPs in large part also can get very technical sometimes, and that's when I think they can lose the audience. So with dark web, interesting, like if you hear my presentation, I don't ever define the dark web in my presentations to MSPs. I don't say what it is. I mean, there's a general awareness, even in small businesses, that there's this thing called the dark web. I mean, LifeLock is doing commercials 24/7 about it. But what I try to present in my slide deck is all of the ways that they're being targeted and why their credentials being exposed on the dark web are a risk to them. So it's less about what the dark web is, and you could do 1 or 2 points about it, but it's really focused on why credentials being exposed on the dark web are a risk to their organization. And then the second part, I guess, the danger of sharing too much information. I mean, there definitely is. So, one of the things we don't share in our data is the actual hacking forums that it comes from. Now, if we're able to sell you, hey, this came from LinkedIn, that's one thing, but we don't need to tell you the actual hacking forum on the dark web because one, it doesn't actually make it any more actionable. And we don't want you or your customers seeking them out. Now, most of them won't ever be able to find it, but that's where a danger can come in. But the bigger danger, truthfully, is not providing this service. I started looking at actual numbers. On average, an organization, and we're talking all sizes, but on average, about 11.63 credential exposures per organization for our customers that are monitoring. Okay.
No.
So if you think about an MSP having 35 clients and they're not offering this service, you're talking about 300 to 400 credentials of their clients that are sitting there on the dark web. And that is dangerous. And even our own partners, and we really try to hammer this home, it's like, if you've got an allotment of 20 domains, even if not all of them are paying customers right now, you should be putting all of them in there and using them, because the second the right person gets exposed, I promise you, they will start paying for the service. But that's just a lot of exposure to not be aware of.
That's a great point. And I think what you're saying is really to focus on the information that's available, the credentials and others, and letting them know that cyber criminals, can get a hold of this information, or anybody can get a hold of this information in various ways. Is that
yeah?
rather
I mean,
focusing on
it's
the dark web and all of the cool stuff that's out there is
right.
we like to dazzle them with, hey, look at all this technology and things out here. But what they really care about is that we're exposed.
Yeah, I mean, the line I often use is the keys to your network could be sitting out on the dark web, and you can either know about it or not. And one of the things I really try to preach, and our team tries to preach, is MSPs need to stop asking for permission. If you ask a person who doesn't know much about the dark web, hey, do you want this service? They're not gonna. No one wants it. They need it, and that's the message that we really try to convey to our partners. And, we're able to do it sometimes for them on some of our sales calls that we've done with them or that, but we really ideally want to train them to have that confidence. And I think that's a big part of it is selling any security service now is just having the confidence to say, this is why you need X, Y, and Z, and not really taking no for an answer anymore.
Yeah, don't back down. Just be that expert that they're looking for and give them the advice that they need.
Yep.
That's an excellent point. So how can MSPs leverage that information in their sales process? Because I know that's really what it comes down to. How do I make money utilizing more of these things? That's the end result of any technology that's up there.
Yeah, so ID Agent, so our product, Dark Web ID, we have a live prospecting tool where you can put the domain of any organization and it will pull up the 100 most recent emails and passwords exposed on the dark web. Now it does, in that view, it masks the password after 4 characters for privacy reasons. They're paying customer, you'll see the full passwords, but that's really what you're using. So if I ran your organization and it came up with the number, let's say 13 exposures, the one thing I'm going to not do is I'm not going to send you all of the data ahead of time. I'm going to use that number as my door opener. So I'll say, Brian, look, we've ran an initial scan. This is what we do. We ran an initial scan. You have 13 exposures on the dark web. I'm more than happy to share this data with you. Can we jump on a call or set up an in-person meeting? So it's using that. I often say like the numbers, they're new sales person's best friend. Use that number. And we've got a really cool, we just upgraded kind of our reports. So it's a really good kind of, if you leave it at an office, it's a great takeaway because there's information beyond just the data. It talks about the risks of an organization, but that number, when I was selling it direct, and I may have shared this with you last time, but I mean, that number got my foot in the door to Starbucks, Walmart, Panera Bread, Best Buy, S.C. Johnson, like speaking to the CIOs of those companies. And the stories we get to hear on the road are unbelievable. I mean, I would have never thought to do this, but we had a partner use Twitter, reached out directly through Twitter to whoever the social media people were for like these large airlines, and mentioned the number of credentials they had. And those social media people passed it along to the right people, and they got meetings with some of the largest airlines in the entire world. So there's a lot of ways you can do it. One of the ways we really talk about on the road, MSPs are definitely starting to get in front of like customers and prospects through lunch and learns and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we do as a partnership is, hey, if you're doing a lunch and learn and you have the list of registration people ahead of time, send us the list of domains and we'll provide you with the number of credentials of every organization in that room. And what that allows you to do, and there's two ways of delivering it. There's a much more kind of in-your-face version, which is you've gone through this whole sales process of explaining to them, why this is a risk to the organization. And like the last slide, you actually show the number of credentials of the organizations in the room. It's just a number. It's not actual personal information, but the call to action is huge there, because then you get to say to them, look, again, let's set up a call and we will show you this data. And trust me, most people in the room, if you show them a number, they want to see their data. And if an MSP is not comfortable doing it that way, there's another really fun way of doing it, which is when they come into the lunch and learn and they register, you give them an envelope with their number and you say, look at the number, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to tell you what that number means. And it's the same call to action. It's just a little less in your face, I guess, in front of everybody, but both have gone over really well with our partners. We've heard some really cool stories about that.
Okay. So it's very helpful to hold your cards to a certain extent rather than, showing everything that you have, in an email or in a phone call to get that face-to-face conversation going.
Yeah, because the problem is if you give up the data without a conversation, it's open to their interpretation. And I already know, I can tell you every time what they're going to say. They're going to go through the data and they're going to look at some of the older employees who don't work there, and they say, we don't care about this data.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But the thing is, older employees, and we have a sheet specific to address that objection. Like, we prove to you why that can still be a risk to the organization, because, hey, you may have shut off Active Directory, but did you shut off their Staples account? Did you shut off their access to the CRM system? Or, all these third-party applications that you may not have shut off years later can still come back and bite you pretty hard.
That's a good point. So when you're doing dark web monitoring, you can expose, the weakest links in the security chain. You have to use some caution sometimes when you're going in to say, hey, this information was available. We found it from this source, because you really don't want to embarrass any key employees or even decision makers when you're working with new clients.
Yeah. So a couple cautionary things would be, one, to run the data ahead of time, so know what you're about to present generally, right? Because there's no question Ashley Madison is going to pop up in some of the searches.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, there's other ones, Mate One, there's some porn websites, but you want to be careful how you do that. And you could decide you could black out some of that if you needed to. I mean, I don't know if we don't have a thing where you can just automatically black it out, but if you decide to print it up, you could, take out certain things. So I think that would probably be the smartest thing to do, is, definitely doing that beforehand. And also just not shaming anybody, because the reality is this affects everybody. I mean, we were just at a huge, Kaseya Connect's big event in Vegas, and we ran every organization that was attending. So, it was over 1,000 domains that we ran. I mean, 80% of the room had an exposure. So everybody's affected for the most part. I think that's what you want to convey. Like, look, everyone's affected, doesn't matter size or industry. And truthfully, LinkedIn is a work-related website. You could totally make the argument of why your work email would be associated with that. So, you know, but, you know, do they need to make sure they're not using their network password on LinkedIn? Yeah, or a pattern of their network password. So I think just kind of shaping it as like, hey, this is something much newer that you didn't know you had to be aware of. But, you know, really, I mean, dark web monitoring wasn't even a thing 2 years ago in this space. So, yeah.
That's a good point. I think even with some of the MSP issues we've seen lately, is they're being targeted as well
Yeah.
as making sure they're running their own organizations. I mean, 80% of that room, which understands the security risks, is a big number.
It's a really big number. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, we have one of our earliest partners, you know, he wasn't very early on, wasn't monetizing it at the time, but he's like, this is worth it just for our own domain, you know?
That's a good point.
So, you know, because you're able to obviously monitor your own domain. So,
So we talked a little, you made some major investments in the last year, other proactive services. I know dark web is where you kind of
yep.
came to fame, but kind of walk us through some of the other things that you've done in the last year as far as
Sure.
the awareness training. I know has been a big new addition.
Yeah, so a lot of it's pretty recent. So back in March, we launched Bullfish ID. So it's, you know, phishing and security awareness training. Kind of was our beta version when we first came out with it. Kind of our 2.0 version included Active Directory sync. In about a week, we're going to have set it and forget it campaigns, so you can kind of just go in and set up the year and whatnot. You know, so really just getting feedback from our partners to really make that, you know, more robust. And we're adding, I think over the next 3 months, we're adding 6 training videos, 6 phishing campaigns per month. So it's going to be a lot more robust in terms of that. And then just, you know, again, continuing to get the feedback to make a product that our MSPs, you know, can fully monetize and whatnot. So that's been a great success so far. You know, again, it's only been like 3 months since we launched it. We're coming out with what we call powered services. So we already provide unbelievable amounts of marketing materials to our partners. We're shifting it and we're kind of rebranding it under what we're calling powered services. And so right now, if they came into our portal, we've got, again, hundreds, not thousands of documents. And, you know, we'll brand that for them, white label it, brand it with them. But in the powered services portal, it's going to have some automation to make it so easy. So if we, you know, came out with a new marketing piece today, Brian, you'd be able to go in and click 2 buttons, your logo, your contact information already preloaded into the document. So, and even some ability to share on social media networks as well, like with the click of a button. So that's kind of just an increased value to our partners. We're not charging anything differently for the powered services. I guess probably the bigger news over the next few months, we're going to be launching a full identity access and management platform. So I've got some notes because I didn't want to miss anything because it's a new talking point for me. But kind of think about, you know, provisioning users, some capabilities with dark web monitoring, multi-factor, single sign-on, password management. So, I mean, ultimately, you know, in case the audience isn't aware, you know, we were acquired by Kaseya a few months back, and they're looking for ID Agent to be become the hub of the security solutions within the Kaseya family. So we're going to be, I mean, it's going to be just a whole new level of stuff and integrations within, you know, some of the other business units, you know, like IT Glue and rapid fire tools, things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of discussion I know around awareness training in particular now. Just taking a step back to that is,
Yeah.
and I know I've seen some stats that seem extremely high, and I'm wondering your opinion on these too, is where 50 to 75% of companies are doing some sort of awareness training. And I know the question is, are they doing some form of it? Do you think they're being effective at it? And what are some of your tips, you think, for MSPs to make sure that their clients are fully engaged with these programs?
Yeah, I don't know how effective they're being. Yeah, there's a lot of different opinions on security awareness training and its effectiveness. I think one thing, and this is where the set it and forget it capability is important, is consistency. So don't just go in and do it 1 month and then stop doing phishing campaigns, because it's nonstop, right? Because we're getting bombarded daily with phishing emails, so you're always at risk. So that capability of being able to go in and potentially set up a year of campaigns for an organization is really helpful. The other thing, you know, Dan Tomaszewski is our VP of Partner Success. He was a former CEO of an MSP. I mean, he did a lot of his training in person, because it's just not the same thing if you're depending just on people taking tests and things like that. That's just not going to be as effective as actually having conversations about it and having that one-on-one time with a small group of people. So that's where the QBR opportunity, I think, comes in. So I think if you're doing a combination of being consistent, trying to change the culture, and actually having in-person type of relationship when you're talking about these things, I think those would be the things that are helpful. But again, it's going to be a constant battle that we're all dealing with. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like that's the area where the reporting would help when you're in the QBRs, and then the engagement of actually doing QBRs and not just with key people, but with a larger number of their employees too, is spot testing and finding out how the whole group is doing. Because it's a little different than just being, working with a CTO or working with individuals that are tech. You've got a lot of people to deal with on the awareness training side.
Yeah, I mean, imagine running this report. So, you've convinced the customer, okay, we're going to do a 3-month beta on some of the security stuff because we don't really think we're at risk. Well, imagine at your QBR time, you get to come in with a report that shows, okay, since we last spoke, you now have 12 new compromised credentials on the dark web. Here's somebody from your accounting department. Here's your CFO with their Active Directory password. And by the way, those phishing campaigns we've been running the last 3 months, the click rate is X percentage. And a really cool stat we have in our report is we actually allow users to submit data. Now, we don't store any of that data, but talk about a powering stat or empowering stat for an MSP to be able, and by the way, 20% of your employees submitted data on a fake email. So now, that's when it gets big into not asking permission. I'm now telling you why we're rolling everything out, including DNS filtering, multi-factor authentication, because I've just proven to you why you need every one of these things. And backup disaster, all those things.
Well, that's a good tie into my next question, which is what's the impact of the proactive cybersecurity services on like dark web monitoring and user awareness on an MSP's bottom line? I know it's not just around these services either. You kind of tipped into some of that. Is what do you see as other opportunities utilizing these services?
Yeah, God, I don't even know where to start. There's so much opportunity with it. Because, even the one thing, and it sounds so salesy, and I do say it from time to time because it's the truth. There's also lost opportunity. Like if you don't have these types of services, you're losing opportunity. You're also losing opportunity to competitors who have it, because the reality is, I'm telling you, dark web monitoring, I mean, we've seen how much we've grown in the last 2 years, is going to be part of a standard security stack. And if you're not offering it, I promise you another MSP is going to send your customers' data to them. And like, why would you want somebody else to send them the data when you could have that data? So that's where you kind of get into this potential lost opportunity if somebody's providing a service that you're not. But man, the stories we hear from our partners, one of the most popular things we talk about this all the time on the road is decline of service. The idea of like, hey, we've just told you why this is important and why it's a risk, and so we're actually making it mandatory. And if you don't want it, you have to sign this decline of service. One of our first partners out of Australia did this to 76 of his customers at $100 a domain per month, and 60 of them agreed to those terms in a single week. We had another partner out of Washington, D.C. that went from monitoring 10 domains to over 200 domains because of a decline of service. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars just on the dark web. But then you take it another step further. We had another partner do his entire security bundle as a requirement. And now I would preface, he definitely spoke at QBRs. They knew it was coming. It wasn't like he just threw this out. He added $18,000 in monthly recurring revenue from his current customer base. And I think that the really interesting thing is he was now using that security bundle as mandatory for any new customers and as a way to vet, hey, I'm not working with you if you don't take this level of security seriously, because then I can't protect you. No different than if you walk into a doctor's office and say, all right, I see 500 HIPAA violations. There's no chance I'm working with you. Right. So, there's that opportunity. But, and I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but there's the other, it's multi-factor, it's password management, DNS filtering, all these other things that could be sold because you've proven them that they have a problem.
Right. You raise an excellent point with the underprotected client can be very expensive for an MSP in the long run if they end up getting attacked too. It makes them look bad. Not to mention the fact that the blame will typically come back to the MSP for not doing all those services proactively. We've had a number of those discussions lately too. But at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. It's what businesses need today. And I think we're seeing more of that pushback from the MSP community now going, okay, it's not just a differentiator cybersecurity services I'm talking about. It's a requirement, and we just need to figure out what level of requirement for each of the clients. And at the end of the day, we also need to be able to make some money too, and hopefully retain those clients.
Yeah, I mean, because I talk to MSPs all the time. I mean, you hear the number one thing they talk about, or one of the number one things they talk about, is just the idea that our customers assume we're doing all of this, at no cost and things like that. So yeah, it's a tough thing that they have to overcome. And, again, I think being in front of them, really educating them is pretty key to that.
Yeah, it's a new day for them. That's it's not 10 years ago, and that's a hard discussion sometimes for MSPs to have, but also for the clients to even realize. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting what happens over the next couple of years as try to push more of those resistant companies to see the light. So, well, it as always, it's fantastic having you on here. Fortunately, we're running low on time now. Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
Just I guess, being a VP of business development and just from the vendor and always trying to make the relationship with, ID agent and really any vendors and their partners better. I would just encourage, MSPs that are out there to engage with their vendors, right? I mean, I think I try to advise people, and I understand you're a small business. You have 10 vendors you're working with, sometimes more. That's very difficult. But if you can find one champion in your MSP to own the relationship with ID agent or with, IT glue, whoever the vendor is, I think that's a huge opportunity because we're adding value into our platform weekly. But if you're not aware of it, you're obviously not going to be able to use that value. And so sometimes having that marketing person or the salesperson, whoever it is, being able to champion it and go in on a weekly basis, make sure they're reading the emails, the updates and things like that. That's what I would love to see. And, and I would encourage them to continue reaching out with ideas, because I'm telling you, ID Agent has been built on ideas from our partners. Another example just came to mind. I mean, we have something called domain monitoring protection. It is 100% from our partners that we did this, which is, if you have 20 domains that you're monitoring, they're your customers, no other ID agent partner can search them in the prospecting tool. So it's an actual protected domain. That came from our partners. And so our partners make our product so much better. And, if you're an ID agent partner, keep them coming, because that's all we want to do is make this product better and continuing to add value and, most importantly, monthly recurring revenue to our partners.
Great. Fantastic. So excellent advice. Thanks for sharing with us today, Matt. Look forward to having you back again soon. Yep. On behalf of IoTSSA, I'd like to thank Matt Solomon from ID Agent for being our guest today, as well as thank all of you for tuning in regularly to the Secure Connections podcast. I encourage you to take a couple more minutes and check out all the great cybersecurity content, including the ID Agent page, which is at our website. It's IoTSSA.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and please have a fantastic and secure day.